I woke up to the sound of boots on concrete, and they weren't mine. It was 2:30 in the morning. I grabbed the bat from under my bed and crept downstairs. The sound was coming from the basement. My basement. The one with the locked storm door that no one besides me had a key to. I flicked on the outside floodlight through the kitchen switch and peered through the basement window. That's when I saw her. Rochelle Fairburn, the HOA vice president, 50-something, bleach blonde bob, yoga pants even though she's never set foot in a gym, and the voice of a smoke alarm. Behind her were two other HOA board members, Greg and Bonnie, both equally nosy and equally convinced they ran the world because they got elected by a handful of neighbors who didn't read the fine print. They were in my basement with flashlights and clipboards. I almost thought I was dreaming. Then I saw Greg snap a few photos of my tools. I opened the storm door from the inside and shouted, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Rochelle shrieked like she'd seen a ghost. "Quentin, you're not allowed to have power tools stored in a residential basement. It's in the bylaws, and that gives you the right to break into my house," I yelled. "This is felony trespassing." Bonnie raised her chin. We knocked. No one answered. We were within our rights to investigate. "Not at 2 in the morning, you weren't." Greg tried to slink past me, but I blocked the stairs. I had my phone out now, camera rolling. "You three better not move." Rochelle tried to grab my phone. "Turn that off. Touch my phone again and you'll be dealing with more than just burglary charges," I warned. They froze. I called the police right there. The dispatcher asked if the intruders were armed. "No," I said, "just delusional." When the cops showed up 12 minutes later, Rochelle tried to play it off. "We're part of the HOA," she said, fake smiling like she was about to sell them a timeshare. "We were just conducting a routine inspection." Officer Daniels looked at her like she had 3 heads. "At 2:30 in the morning, without permission, through a locked door, it's in the bylaws," she snapped. "That's not how laws work," he said as he cuffed her. I watched Rochelle, Greg, and Bonnie get led out of my basement in handcuffs, sputtering about community standards and neighborhood integrity, while the whole block peeked out their windows. I should have been furious, but honestly, I was just getting started. By sunrise, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. I didn't need to post anything online. Word spread faster than a brush fire when 3 HOA board members got arrested in the middle of the night. Still, I wasn't about to sit back and let it blow over. I knew Rochelle and her band of rulebook vigilantes weren't just going to take this lying down. People like that never do. They'd twist the story, cry victim, and try to worm their way out with some technicality. I wasn't going to give them the chance. At 8 sharp, I called my attorney, Micah Tran. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a former state prosecutor who traded in his badge for private practice after getting tired of politics. He also happened to be my neighbor 3 houses down. "Let me guess," Micah said before I could say a word. "Basement, 3 stooges, breaking and entering." "Exactly. They had clipboards," I said. "Of course they did," he muttered. "Come by the office, bring your footage. I want to get ahead of whatever nonsense they're about to pull." By 10, we were sitting in Micah's office downtown. I handed him the flash drive with the video, along with the copy of my home surveillance. I'd already pulled the footage from the backyard cam that caught them using a lockpick kit to get through the storm door. Rochelle's leopard print leggings made her easy to identify. Micah leaned back in his chair as he watched it. "You couldn't ask for better evidence. They're done." "They're going to scream civil authority," I said. "Claim it was some kind of emergency inspection. Doesn't matter. Their HOA charter gives them 0 right to enter private property uninvited, especially not physical entry. And at night, that's aggravated trespass at best, burglary at worst." "Think it'll stick?" Micah raised an eyebrow. "With this video?" "You bet it will." An hour later, we were sitting in front of Detective Farley at the county sheriff's office. He was already familiar with the case. "I've got 3 people in holding who think they're the neighborhood police," he said, flipping through his notes. "They claim they were acting within some community enforcement authority under a clause from 1989. Micah chuckled. "You mean the clause that was voided by state law in 2009? "Bingo," the detective said. "But they're not backing down." "Rochelle already called her lawyer, says she's planning to sue for wrongful arrest." "Let her," I said. I've got the footage and I'm pressing full charges. Detective Farley nodded. Then I'll be recommending felony burglary, unlawful entry, and criminal conspiracy. You want a restraining order too? Absolutely. By afternoon, Rochelle, Greg, and Bonnie were all being processed for arraignment. I returned home to find a flyer duct taped to my front door. Someone had tried to be sneaky about it, but the printer ink was smudged and the paper was crooked. It was a community alert from the HOA, unsigned, warning residents about false accusations and personal vendettas destabilizing the neighborhood. I peeled it off and tossed it in the trash. 2 houses down, my neighbor Angela waved me over from her porch. She was holding a stack of those same flyers. They were slipping these into mailboxes an hour ago, she said. I caught Bonnie's husband doing it before he took off in that beat-up Tahoe. Great, I muttered. They're already trying to spin it. I've got my Ring cam recording the whole thing if you want it, please. Back home, I started compiling everything. The storm door footage, the audio of the basement confrontation, the police body cam, and now the mailbox stunt. I wasn't just going to press charges, I wanted them removed from the board entirely. Rochelle had been lording over this neighborhood for 5 years. This wasn't her first stunt, just the most brazen. 3 months ago, she tried to fine a retired veteran named Marvin for having non-standard fencing after he installed a small wooden gate to keep his dog from running into the street. A week later, his gate was mysteriously torn off its hinges. No one could prove it was the HOA, but everyone had their suspicions. Then there was the time Bonnie threatened a single mom with foreclosure over unapproved Christmas decorations. Her crime, string lights shaped like stars instead of icicles. I wasn't alone in this, and now I had momentum. That evening, I called an emergency town hall at the community center, not under the HOA's authority, just a general gathering. I sent out flyers myself and posted on the neighborhood app. By the time 7 o'clock rolled around, over 40 people had shown up. Some were curious, some were furious. I stood at the front with a small projector and played the footage. I didn't need to say much. The room went dead silent as Rochelle's voice echoed through the speakers, bragging about documenting evidence and enforcing compliance. When it ended, Angela stood up. They could have done this to anyone, she said. What if Quentin hadn't been home? What if one of our kids had been in that basement? A few others nodded. Marvin rose from the back row. I've lived here 18 years, never seen anything like this, and we've let him get away with too much. I say we vote to suspend the board, immediately. We can't, someone said. The bylaws require a formal recall. Micah, sitting in the front row, cleared his throat. Actually, he said, standing, if the board is under criminal investigation and 2/3 of the homeowners sign a removal petition, the state allows for emergency dissolution of board authority under Title 12, Section 31C. We just have to file it with the municipal court. I looked around. People were already pulling out pens. The next 2 days were a blur. We knocked on doors, gathered signatures, and by Friday evening, we had over 70% of the homeowners backing the petition. Micah helped me file the paperwork, and by Monday morning, the court had issued a temporary suspension of the HOA's powers pending a hearing. Meanwhile, Rochelle was out on bail and not taking it well. She showed up at my driveway that afternoon, pacing in wedge sandals and waving a stack of papers. You think you've won, she snapped. You've just made enemies with the entire board. There is no board, I said. You're suspended legally. This is harassment. No, I said, holding up my phone. This is evidence. You set foot on my property again, I'll add trespassing to your charges. She sputtered something about defamation, but walked off when she realized half the block was watching from their porches. That night, Detective Farley called. Thought you'd want to know, he said. We ran a full background on the lockpick kit we found in Greg's car. Turns out it's linked to 3 previous break-ins reported over the past year, 2 in your subdivision, 1 just outside. My jaw tightened. You think they've done this before? We're reopening those cases now. And if we find their prints inside those homes, they're looking at serious time. I hung up and stared at the quiet street outside my window. This wasn't just about a basement anymore. This was bigger, and I was going to make sure every single one of them paid for it. By Thursday morning, the courtroom was packed, not with lawyers or suits, but with neighbors. People who had never attended an HOA meeting in their lives were now sitting shoulder to shoulder, some still in their work uniforms, others holding coffee cups like they were watching a trial on TV. But this wasn't entertainment, it was a reckoning. Judge Calder, gray-bearded and sharp-eyed, entered without fanfare and took his seat. He glanced at the stack of documentation Micah had submitted the night before. It included signed affidavits, timestamps, camera footage, and a full breakdown of the HOA's overreach. Not just the basement trespass, but the broader patterns Micah had uncovered after digging into their financials. Because here's where things really took a turn. The deeper Micah looked, the more rot he found. Rochelle hadn't just been power tripping, she'd been funneling HOA funds into shell maintenance contracts. Over $20,000 worth of landscaping paid to a company that didn't exist outside of a P.O. box in the next county. Greg's name appeared on the account linked to the payments, and Bonnie. She'd approved every one of them as treasurer. Micah had submitted it all in discovery. The court had already frozen the HOA's bank account while investigators traced the flow of money. Judge Calder looked up, eyes sweeping the room. Let's be perfectly clear here. This hearing is to determine whether the governing authority of the Willow Creek HOA shall be immediately and indefinitely suspended, pending further criminal proceedings. Rochelle stood, her lawyer beside her, a stiff man in a pinstripe suit who looked like he'd rather be defending a parking ticket. She kept her voice steady, but it had the edge of desperation. Your Honor, this is a targeted witch hunt by a disgruntled resident who has been openly hostile toward the HOA for years. The board had legal reasons to inspect the property in question. We believed there were code violations that posed a safety risk. Judge Calder raised one hand. And you believed this justified a break-in at 2:30 in the morning, the lawyer interjected. We contest the term break-in. They entered through an external access point with a lockpick tool, the judge interrupted, which was not issued by any HOA charter or approved under state housing code. Are you familiar with the term constructive burglary, counselor? Silence. In that case, sit down. Micah stood next. Your Honor, in addition to the unlawful entry, we have reason to believe that the board has been operating under fraudulent pretenses. We've submitted evidence of embezzlement, forged invoices, and conflicts of interest that violate both HOA bylaws and the state's nonprofit governance statutes. The judge leaned forward. Have criminal charges been filed? Sheriff's Department is processing them now, Micah said. Detective Farley informed me this morning they're coordinating with the state fraud unit. The judge nodded. Proceed. The rest of the hearing was procedural. The evidence spoke louder than anyone. By 11 o'clock, the judge had ruled in our favor. Effective immediately, the HOA board was suspended from all operations, pending criminal prosecution. The management rights would be handed to a temporary trustee, a third-party oversight firm chosen by the court. Outside the courthouse, a cluster of reporters waited. Apparently, someone had tipped off the local news. Rochelle tried to rush past them, sunglasses on, but one reporter caught up and asked, Is it true you used HOA funds for personal expenses? Rochelle didn't answer. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and kept walking. That night, I got a call from Detective Farley. His tone was different this time, more serious. We've got something, he said. I need to show you in person. I met him at the station 20 minutes later. He led me to an evidence room where a small table held a laptop, a thumb drive, and a battered external hard drive. This came from Greg's garage. We got a warrant after linking his account to the fake landscaping company. He panicked and tried to wipe the drive, but our techs recovered most of it. He clicked a few folders open. They were labeled by address. My stomach dropped. These are surveillance recordings, Farley said. Dozens of them, hidden cams, audio bugs. We found dummy sprinkler heads and motion lights loaded with microcams. I scrolled through the folder names. Angela's address was there. So were Marvin's and 3 other neighbors I recognized. Mine, of course, was listed first. Farley clicked one file. A grainy video played my backyard the night before the break-in. Rochelle's voice came through faintly. Tonight's the only window. He's working double shifts tomorrow and the trash pickup will cover tire tracks. We get in, document the tools, and leave a notice. If he fights it, we hit him with the violation stack. Another voice Greg's. You sure he's not on the city council or anything? No, he's just a contractor. He'll panic once we start the fines. Farley paused the video. We've got them on premeditated illegal surveillance, conspiracy to commit burglary, and now wiretapping. That puts them in felony territory across multiple counts. State prosecutors are already drafting charges. I sat back, stunned. And the rest of the board? We're interviewing former board members now. Looks like Rachel kept the inner circle small, but the others may have known more than they let on. And there's one more thing. He opened another folder, this one full of PDFs, internal memos, emails, and meeting notes. All of them referenced a term I'd never seen before: selective enforcement strategy. It's a pattern, Farley explained. They targeted certain homeowners, those who didn't attend meetings, those with less legal knowledge, or anyone they thought wouldn't fight back. They'd hit them with minor violations, then escalate fines until they were behind. Once they owed enough, Rachel would offer to waive the fines in exchange for property use rights. You mean easements, in theory, in practice. She tried to use that leverage to push one family into letting her build a side driveway extension. Another elderly couple was threatened with lien filings unless they donated a strip of their backyard for HOA landscaping. And no one reported it. Most of them didn't know they could. Or were too intimidated. Back home, I printed out everything. I met with Angela, Marvin, and a few others. We decided it wasn't enough to just dissolve the board. We wanted restitution, and we wanted safeguards. The next community meeting, this time held legally under the oversight of the temporary trustee, was standing room only. Micah presented a proposal for a new charter, one that would make HOA authorities subject to regular audits, rotating leadership, and mandatory homeowner votes on all major decisions. No more unchecked power, no more backroom deals. Angela raised her hand. What about the people who have already been wronged? The liens, the fines? Micah nodded. We're working with the state attorney to void every violation issued under the previous board. And once the fraud case is resolved, the court can pursue restitution for affected homeowners. Someone asked if Rachel could ever return to the board. Micah answered without hesitation. Not a chance. As for the three of them, Rachel, Greg, and Bonnie, they were arraigned within the week. Rachel's bail was revoked after prosecutors presented the surveillance files. She was remanded to county jail awaiting trial. Greg and Bonnie struck plea deals for reduced sentences in exchange for full cooperation. The neighborhood changed after that. You could feel it. People talked more. The air felt less watched. Flags came out on porches again. Kids rode bikes without getting side-eyed by clipboard-wielding zealots. Marvin rebuilt his gate. Angela started a neighborhood garden committee, voluntary, of course, and me, I finally reorganized my basement. Installed a new lock on the storm door, a reinforced one with a steel frame. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew better now. Power doesn't corrupt all at once. It seeps, turns rules into weapons, turns neighbors into targets, but if you shine a bright enough light on it. Even the deepest rot can't hide. The trial began 3 weeks later in a high-security courtroom downtown. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Justice Vega, had a reputation for cutting through theatrics and getting to the meat of a case. No press was allowed inside, but the court had permitted a limited public gallery. I sat in the second row, behind the prosecution table, beside Angela and Marvin. Micah was up front, coordinating with the assistant district attorney who was leading the state's case. The charges had expanded far beyond what anyone had predicted. Surveillance violations, burglary, unlawful access to private property, mail fraud, and now one count of coercion under elder abuse statutes. The last one had come out of nowhere, but the evidence was airtight. Rachel had leaned on an elderly widow, Edna Collins, who lived near the edge of the neighborhood, pressuring her to sign over a section of her lot in exchange for rescinding more than 8 fabricated fines she'd allegedly accrued from unauthorized window treatments. Edna had been too frightened to speak up initially. But after the news broke, she'd come forward, accompanied by her niece, and provided notarized documentation, including an audio recording from a hidden recorder her niece had given her months earlier. In that recording, Rochelle could be heard telling Edna, "Either you sign this or we start lien proceedings. I'm being generous here." The courtroom was silent as the audio played. Justice Vega looked up afterward. "That, ladies and gentlemen, is not neighborhood management. That is extortion." Rochelle sat at the defense table, her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles pale. Her lawyer knew this time, since the last one had dropped her after the surveillance files surfaced, tried to argue diminished responsibility. Stress, community pressure, delusions of authority. None of it held up. Greg and Bonnie had already pled out. Their testimonies were scheduled for the second day. When Greg took the stand, he didn't even try to defend himself. "She told us we were cleaning the place up," he said, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "She said people would thank us later. I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to be the one who got fined next." "And the fake landscaping invoices?" the prosecutor asked. "She set that up." Rochelle made it sound like it was a way to allocate unclaimed funds. She said it was standard practice. Greg's voice cracked near the end. He looked older than he had a month ago. Bonnie followed, more defiant, but under cross-examination, she cracked when asked about the surveillance devices. "I didn't install them," she said too quickly, "but you knew about them." "I was told they were for security, inside residents' homes." Bonnie hesitated. "I was told not to ask." By the end of the week, the prosecution rested. The defense barely put up a fight. Rochelle insisted on taking the stand herself, which everyone knew was a mistake. She spoke in clipped, defensive tones, trying to paint herself as a misunderstood leader. She claimed she'd never authorized break-ins, that the surveillance was an over-enthusiastic initiative, and that the money had been redirected for unapproved but necessary projects. But when cross-examined, every answer unraveled. "You labeled Greg as your compliance enforcer in this email. What did that entail? Just reminding people of their obligations through break-ins?" "No, I didn't tell him to do that, but you were present when he did." "I was there to observe." "Observe what exactly?" Rochelle's jaw twitched. "Potential violations." Justice Vega leaned forward. "Miss Fairburn, you were inside a locked basement at night, with no warrant, no permission, and no emergency. That's not observation. That's a felony." The jury deliberated for less than half a day. When they returned, the verdict was read aloud. Rochelle was found guilty on all counts: burglary, conspiracy, misuse of surveillance, elder coercion, and fraud. Greg and Bonnie's plea deals would see them both serve reduced sentences and pay restitution. But Rochelle was handed the maximum allowed under state law: 9 years, with no possibility of parole for at least 6. The gasp from the gallery wasn't shock, it was relief. Outside the courthouse, I stood with Angela, Marvin, and Edna's niece as reporters clustered nearby. We didn't give statements. We didn't need to. The story was out there now, and the truth spoke for itself. In the weeks that followed, life in the neighborhood took on a different rhythm. The temporary trustee continued managing the basics: trash pickup, landscaping, shared space repairs, but now everything was transparent. Monthly reports were emailed directly to residents. No one had to beg for records or fear retaliation for putting up a seasonal wreath. Micah helped draft a new governance model with rotating volunteer oversight and quarterly votes on all policy changes. We called it the Willow Charter. It eliminated the power of a centralized board and replaced it with a flat committee system. No single person could make a ruling. All fines required a 75% approval from the oversight panel, and all residents had the right to dispute citations before a neutral third party. More than that, people actually started talking to each other again. Angela hosted weekend potlucks under the community pavilion. Marvin started a tool sharing shed. The whole neighborhood chipped in to fix up Edna's back fence, which had been quietly falling apart for years while Rochelle ignored her maintenance requests. One Saturday, I stood in the backyard, grilling with a few neighbors, when Micah strolled over with a paper in hand. "Got the final restitution figures," he said, taking a sip from a sweating glass of lemonade. Between the fraud settlement and the asset seizure, we're looking at over 70,000 returned to the HOA account. Let's use it to fix the pool, Angela called from the table. Already voted on, Micah said. Pool repairs, plus adding a ramp for accessibility and new lighting. I turned to him. And Rochelle, transferred to state prison yesterday. She's not appealing, her lawyer said she's choosing to reflect. I didn't respond, there was nothing left to say. That night, I lingered on the porch longer than usual. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting a warm orange hue over the quiet street. No shouting, no clipboard inspections, just the faint sound of kids laughing 2 houses down as someone turned on a sprinkler. The storm door was still reinforced, still locked, but I hadn't checked it in weeks. I didn't feel the need to anymore. I'd built this house myself, every beam, every tile, every corner of it. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine again. Not just the building, but the space. The neighborhood, the community, justice had been served. The rot had been pulled out at the root. And the people who tried to turn our homes into leverage, who thought they were above the law because they had titles and clipboards, they got exactly what they deserved, not because I had power. But because I didn't let them take mine.